What's up? What's up? You are hanging with the beast. And is that not a magnificent song? That is one of my favorite songs, man. And man, do you really appreciate Peter's vocals on that song? Of course, I'm talking about Pictures of Matchstick Man, the typo pictures of Matchstick Men, rather, the typo negative version. You probably are familiar with the version that Ozzy Osbourne did with typo negative off of the soundtrack for Private Parts, Howard Stern's movie. But what a perfect song to bring to have as our intro for this show. So, this episode, we are talking about all things Peter Steele, the late, great Peter Steele. In my opinion, one of the greatest lead singers there has ever been, one of my favorite lead singers ever from one of my favorite bands of all times. And I've said it various times before in the last episode as well. Before that, I had the pleasure to see Typo Negative 14 times in concert, and every time Peter sounded magnificent as always. So just start off by saying, I think that in music, we always have these artists that have the total package. And what I mean by that, they have a unique look, they have a unique sound with their voice, and then, of course, they have a unique sound with their band. And then, of course, they have unique writing, as in terms of lyrics for the music. And Peter was all things. I mean, let's face it, he was a lead singer, he was a kick-ass bass player, and he wrote music. He wrote the songs, he wrote the lyrics, man. Um, so therefore, being a jack of all trades, I mean, that's I guess in the world of music, it's very rare at times that you have someone that can do all those things, and have a lot of success at it, or just kind of, for what I felt typo negative is they were way outside the lines. So in a coloring book, when they tell you color inside the lines, typo negative colored way outside the lines, and way outside the lines is where you always find your most creative and most best wonderful music and artists, and therefore Peter fit right into that. Um, and again, I think that everything that had transpired was what it was supposed to be, especially Peter's journey through music. Of course, one of the more unique things, and I kind of covered this when we talked about lead singers, who was the best lead singer. We broke it down into various categories. Peter fit into so many different categories. Because he was coming over from a different time. He came over from the 90s. I'm sorry, from the 80s rather. Where he had been in bands such as Fallout and Carnivore, and then, of course, with typo negative, they really made it big in the 90s. But he had been around in the 80s and had been doing a lot of work, and then they crossed over even over into 2000. So the longevity was definitely there. And the good thing is too is that he was an artist that came from a different time and a different place, and was able to fine tune and find the voice that we so much love, and the sound that became, worldwide, became memorable. I mean, let's face it, typo negative has some of the greatest fans of all time, some of the most loyal fans I have ever seen. I'm one of them. I'm proud to be one of them. And it's always great to have Q&A with a lot of different fans, especially, you know, um, especially the typo negative fans, because, again, I think that the one thing I can't speak for, I can only speak for myself, but I think that one of the main things that we all had in common was that their music, meant a lot to us, and kind of, maybe perhaps spoke to us, personally. I covered that in my last show. And of course, Peter being the writer of the music, or one of the main writers of the music, or all of the music for that matter, this came a lot from his personal life, from his personal experiences. And I think that the great thing about him was that he wrote from a place of realism, because as human beings we all hurt, we all go through rough periods of time, whether it's losing a girlfriend, or a loved, a significant other. We break up with people, breakups happen, it hurts us. How does it affect us? Maybe those people were not good to us, cheated on us, or had not treated us correctly. Hopefully we all don't have to experience the pain and suffering of losing a parent, but sometimes it's inevitable, and we can those of us who have experienced that, we can resonate with that aspect as well, because as you know, he lost his mother and his father, and wrote two wonderful songs about them, one of them being Nettie, about his mother, off the album um, Life is Killing Me, and of course, The Dream is Dead, which came off the same album, which I believe was about his dad. And that song always comes to mind on Valentine's Day, which just passed, one of the holidays that I fucking hate the most. My Boston accent came out there. Did you hear that? You heard that? Fucking the fucking Red Sox. Go to a bar. No, I hate that holiday, but that song always comes to mind. The Dream is Dead, especially the lyrics: "Champagne glass of blood and wine on chocolate hearts alone I dine. Another lonely Valentine's Day." I mean, two phenomenal songs that unfortunately came from, well, fortunately that came from unfortunate situations. I mean, losing parents must be the most excruciating pain there is, especially when you're close to them, and even most likely when you're not close to them to some extent. They're your mom and dad, so it's got to be rough. But again, that's another aspect of him, I think, that was wonderful, is that he wrote from these real places. And then, of course, there was his unfortunate battle with addiction, which I have to give him a lot of credit for, and I have to give a lot of credit to all those who battle with addiction. Kudos, respect, and love to you, all you who do it day by day, is the saying, I believe. And it's something that everyone can take from. That's how you live your life, is day by day. And as we all know, there are some people who unfortunately have it 10 times worse than others, and they're just trying to get by. Sometimes it's not day by day, sometimes it's minute by minute, sometimes it's hour by hour, or even worse. But again, you can take from that and learn to live your life a certain way. But much love and respect to him for battling his demons. As he did. And he was able to take something from that and turn it into wonderful music. Uh, you know, uh, Sometimes they always say that from a place of pain and a place of suffering and a place of hardship and struggle always comes these wonderful things. Art comes out of there, or wonderful moments, and that's just it's a phenomenal aspect of artists, and he was one of the more phenomenal ones, I always felt. Another thing too I loved about him is that he took from his surroundings. That's what great artists do. They take from what they know. Him being a person who grew up in Brooklyn, who was used to a certain aspect of life. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, obviously, as they always say, everybody's from Brooklyn. I myself am blessed, honored, and humbled to be from Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn, primarily raised in Queens. But Brooklyn was like a place that I was there all the time, whether it was Bay Ridge, whether it was Park Slope playing ball, whether it was, oh my God, Bensonhurst, or by Voorhees Street over there, where the movie theater is, because I had an uncle who lived right there. We were always there, going to Brennan and Carr, where it was a place that my brothers and sister and my grandparents lived, because my grandparents always took us there. And again, just taking rides there with my parents when I was younger, just going to see all the places that my aunts and uncles lived at, where they grew up. I still do it. We still go through the neighborhood sometimes and go see the old haunts, as they call it. But that's something that I and so many others could resonate with, is that him sing about his experiences in Brooklyn. Again, you hear and see that so much on so many different songs, and so many come to mind. Two that come to mind all the time are obviously Todd Shipgods, which was you know off of Life is Killing Me, where he sings about his dad who worked in the shipyard there, I believe, which was in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And I love the intro to that song, where you can hear the sound of the ships in the harbor. And if any you guys who live in Brooklyn, who've lived in Brooklyn, all know as well, you can always hear the ships in the harbor right by the Verrazano Bridge, those humongous shipping ships, or just other ships as well. You can hear that, and again, he's singing from that experience. That was wonderful, and of course, one of their greatest songs of all time, which was in praise of Bacchus. A lonely blue girl guards the riverbed. She shakes her brown torch at the tide, like I had mentioned in the last when in one of the shows with talking about Typo Negative. He's talking about the Statue of Liberty, which again, not to sound repetitive, but I for so long I couldn't figure out what the hell he was talking about, and then like an idiot. It hit me later, and I'm like, "Oh my God, that's the Statue of Liberty!" Or someone had told me that. Most likely, someone had told me that. But again, that's something that you would know as you drove past the Bell on the side of the Bell Parkway, and as you go all the way up towards Zavarian High School, where my older brother is actually a dean of special ed. Um, Hence, why I'm always kind of going in that direction to visit him or whatever. But as you're going up in that direction, you look to your left, and there's the Statue of Liberty. So I love the fact that he sung and took from all his experiences. And again, I think that is so important from artists of all walks of life, whether it is painters, poets, writers, actors, directors. That's where you see authenticity. That's where you see genius. You know, I think that when you see an artist who pulls from their life experiences, there is something in that is priceless. And there's a lot of artists that cannot do that because for whatever reason, they have not had the luxury of living in a certain place or being among a certain amount of people. And Peter lived in Brooklyn, which was, the center of the universe. Okay. Especially today, it was the center of the universe. But in his time, of course, growing up in the 60s, 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, it was changing all the time, but yet it was always still the same. That was just a magnificent aspect of it, and all the wonderful things that were around and the personalities that were around. He took from that. He also wrote from a place of his love for nature and his love for his job, which he had, which everyone knows, when he worked for the New York City Parks Department. He took from that, the wonderful song that we all love, Green Man. And again, you know how long it took me to figure out that in the beginning was the sound of a truck? I don't know what the hell that was. But even the wonderful, amazing lyrics from that song. I mean, he's talking about all the changes in nature, the sun refracting off the river, the different colors. I mean, that's to me that is extremely in depth. And then, of course, his fascination or his questions and curiosity about death. Let me tell you something, and I'm sure I am not the first person to say this, but of course, I'm just one of the many repetitive parrots to say this. No, but as human beings, I think it would be crazy to say that if someone didn't think of death and that wouldn't be fantasize about death. Why should that's part of being a human being, because it's the unknown. It's something we do not know, yet we fantasize about it, and it becomes this wonderful love-hate relationship with it. And you know what, being a Catholic, and I say that, listen, I'm the farthest thing from being a good Catholic. In fact, every time I go near a church, man, I'm always afraid that sucker's gonna burn down, or like all the statues are gonna turn and say, "Oh, look who's here," you know. Um, but that's another aspect that Peter took from growing up in a Catholic household, being a Catholic for a while. As everybody knows, he was in his Catholic faith, and then, like most people do, it happens. It's a part of being human. He broke away from that for a while, and then he came back. But he sung from that aspect as well. Growing up in a Catholic household, and everything in church and saints and this and that, and me being a Catholic, man, I pulled right from that, man. I could resonated right from that. I was an altar boy. Go figure. Isn't that to me? That's absolutely terrifying. Okay, that was my mother's doing. Okay, although I had a lot of good friends that were altar boys. My two older brother were altar boys. Let me tell you this on the subject of being an altar boy. It was a kick-ass way to get out of school and make some money on the side. So basically, like when they would have openings for 9 o'clock mass on the weekdays. You damn well better believe we raised our hand real fast because we knew it meant an hour out of school. We could go back into the sacristy, sip a little wine without anybody seeing us, and then we'd run around the church and kind of like touch things and point things out, mess with the incense, what have you. And then hopefully, if there was a funeral or a wedding afterwards, we would hang around and do that too, because you get paid for, you get paid a lot more for a wedding, but you get paid for a funeral. Now, I'm not saying, hey, the funeral was a positive experience in that, it was all, it wasn't, it was most likely it was sad, but, you made some money and you got to stay out of school. So it paid to be an altar boy. But again, I so many others could resonate with a lot of his lyrics in terms of that. He always kind of sung about that, and I think that's what made him genius. That his lyrics, would go back and forth between, I guess, what some would consider be a dark place and a light place. But that's part of being human. That's what you do, especially when you are in touch with all these different feelings and emotions, as he was, obviously, and you've gone through all these different things, whether it's breakup, the loss of a parent, or the battles of addictions. He well-rounded person, very intelligent, well-rounded person. If you In his interviews, always well-spoken, extremely intelligent. Um, you was very, processed a lot of the questions he was given. Always had really interesting answers. Um, so again, a person with so many levels to them, and that was one of the main reasons why I loved it, man. Uh, you know, I also, again, so many others have. I was very blessed, humbled, and lucky to have met him in person when Typo Negative was doing those. I think it was like a meet and greet at the original Duff's in Brooklyn, and then at the actual when they had re-released their last album, Dead Again, and it kind of came out in that red cover, because I think along with it came the DVD. Was it Symphony for the Devil? I could be wrong, but it's where they had the song from what was it? They had a couple different songs on there. That the song that they when they covered Santana's work, so they had the re-release party for that. And I remember two things that stuck out in my mind was, because you know how it is sometimes. You see somebody on stage, you see somebody on TV or in a film or in interviews, and you always hope that they are exactly what they appear to be. And so many times we see that that's not true, and it's disappointing for fans. To an extent, it's disappointing for fans. So the two times that I was able to see him, which were both at Duff's, the first time I remember, which was just basically that meet and greet, was that it was crowded. It was a tight space, as Duff's was. Fucking kick ass place though, man. But it was rather tight, and there were a lot of fans there. We were all there, just to same thing, really cool. You could meet the whole band, say hello, whatever. There was no one stopping you from doing it. They were like regular people. They couldn't have been more friendly, more accommodating. And I remember the last person that was looking for that night, I hadn't had the chance to see Peter, but lo and behold, you couldn't miss him, obviously. 6'8". How can you miss anyone who's 6'8"? But I remember seeing him, and he was having a conversation with somebody else, and whoever that person was wanted to obviously wrap the evening up. But I remember him turning to that person and saying, "But we still have fans outside. There are people who came here to see us." And I remember I had so much respect for, because he took the time to talk to everybody who had come to see him. And I don't mean just like hello, goodbye, like he got into a conversation. The second time, which again was the giveaway, I remember there was again a long line to see him, and it was on in the outside part of the area, and the majority of the people who were a lot of very some hot ladies, man. Much respect to him on that note. Beautiful women all lined up to see him, and it was funny because if you were waiting on the line like me, and I got to mention my brother Frank Ferry again, because when it came to Typo Negative, him and I were all over the place with this, but we were both there together, and there were this slew of beautiful women in front of us, and the line was long, and they would take their time hanging out with him as they were able to meet and greet with him, but he would not rush them. They were sitting on his lap, touching his hair, it was well worth the wait, man. So when we had the chance to meet him and talk to him, he went back and forth with us for a whole long while and kept it very personal, which was awesome. And then, in fact, tell you the truth, and I'm sure so many of you are familiar with this and probably were there for that matter, when they had released Dead Again the first time, the original time, which of course was was not the Red album, but the first time that they had released it. One of the things they did, especially around my neck of the woods, well, not exactly my neck of the woods, farther out, Looney Tunes, the famous music store out on the island, was doing this meet and greet with Typo Negative, and you could buy the album when it came out. So me, my buddy Frank Ferry, and the Mad Russian Melanie had gone to see them, bought the CD at the time, and we were able to meet and greet the entire band. And once again, they were all nothing short of awesome, very personable. And I remember when we got up to Peter again, kept it. He took his time talking to people, all the fans. There was a long line there, man. It wasn't just like a few people. There was a lot of people there, but he was very personable with everyone, didn't rush anybody, went back and forth. I mean, I think he asked me how much I benched at the time, and we were going from there. What do you do? Where you from? Da, da, da. I mean, it was great, especially when you're a fan. And this is a guy that you love his lyrics, you love his music, you love when you see them and they are who they are, you appreciate that so much more. And that's one of the aspects why I always felt that he and Typo Negative was so special is because they never sold themselves out. They were always true to what they were. And I know, and it was always, I think it was Howard Stern. I could be wrong, but I remember Howard Stern asking them, because they were on Howard Stern a few times. There's that funny video of them performing Cinnamon Girl, and then Josh kind of turns over the organ and whatnot. But there's I think Howard Stern would like love them, of course, and was always curious to know how come they weren't bigger than they, what I guess, whatever, but because he's like, you guys are awesome. And that's what I always loved about them, is they never sold themselves out. And so many times we see artists and bands that sell their ass out. They sell themselves out, or they become something that they weren't, whatever the case may be, and they don't stick to what made them who they were while they're growing. That's not what Typo Negative did. Typo Negative was always, you could always expect them to be who they were while they were doing wonderful stuff. Like even on the last album, Dead Again, where they did September Sun, that does not sound like them in the beginning. I know I sound repetitive, but that was the great thing about them. And then, of course, in the rest of the song, you start to hear excerpts of Typo Negative, but they were always, expanding, even early on, until they really found that unique sound that they had. That's one of the things I respected most about them, man. But Peter had an extremely interesting life. What I always found to be rather mesmerizing was how he was born in 62. So when you think about it, he experienced the 60s for 8 years. And I'm sure, of course, as a young child, maybe a lot of that didn't resonate, because it doesn't as a young child, as we all know. But of course, he was able to, I'm sure what he was able to experience was a lot of the 60s, obviously a lot of the 70s, the 80s, and then on, and so forth. Also, too, he had 5 older sisters. So as I have read in various interviews, his, obviously, your older siblings sometimes are the people around you most have an effect on you when it comes to music or things that they're into. You're either around, you may not like it, you may hate it, but you're around it. And obviously his older sisters, and I'm sure his parents as well, a lot of what they liked kind of cemented itself in his memory or his brain. Because let's face it, Typo Negative went on to cover, various bands from the 60s, whether it was the Beatles, Seals and Crofts, the Doors, um, and various other bands. They covered Black Sabbath, so many. And they did absolutely an amazing job to it. Neil Young. So obviously all that had a hand in, in a lot of his music, his bandwidth for things, all artistically. And again, I'm every we all who have siblings can resonate with that. Me myself, I had two older brothers. My oldest brother Christian, who I consider to be a music genius, another one like my father, who's like a music dictionary, just different type of music. From him, what was I exposed to? I was exposed to obviously the greats, which was the Who, the Beatles, Doors, the Rolling Stones, Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, John Cale, um, God, Jimi Hendrix, thank God, a lot of blues, and so many other wonderful types of music. From my middle brother, a little more similar to me in terms of alternative music, whether it was the Stone Temple Pilots, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Hole, Metallica, but also a lot of R&B and rap. The classics, EPMD, Tribe Called Quest, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, a lot of that stuff. I was exposed to that from my parents. What was I exposed to? A lot of great stuff. Little Anthony and the Imperials, the Drifters, Frank Sinatra, Elvis, Johnny Cash, Roy Orbison, Lou Christie, the Beach Boys, all this wonderful stuff. So when you're lucky to be around a lot of that stuff, it does something to you. And again, you don't have to like it, but it makes you, I think, more well read, well balanced as whatever it is you are. And in Peter's case, obviously that made sense. And another great thing about him too, like I mentioned before, is he lived during these different times, so he was able to experience all the different times: the late '60s, the '70s, the '80s, obviously, which is where he got his start, and then the '90s, and then of course a more interesting note is that they became primarily most famous in the '90s, and he was already in his 30s, which is, again, it's never too late, it's never too early, whatever it is. He was already a mature man who had to now kind of deal with the stress of fame and the stress of everything that comes with it. Because let's face it, at that time, and we're talking the '90s primarily, of course, there was MTV, there was VH1, there was the box. They were traveling and touring. I think for 2 years, they said, for Bloody Kisses or October Rust. They were doing a lot of touring, obviously, in those days, to kind of build up momentum and build up ex, ex, you know experience, and get the sound out there. Because again, with a lot of the more radio play that there was back then on 104.3, 92.3, um for some whatever reason, they didn't get they didn't get the due that they really needed, or they didn't get like a lot of the radio play on, I guess, what you want to call the mainstream, whatever that stupid circuit is, whoever makes those rules, who knows. But they didn't get a lot of their play there, unfortunately. And it wasn't until Bloody Kisses and Black Number One that I started to really hear them. But again, he had a very interesting life. And you could tell right away, other than being very intelligent, very well spoken, musically, he knew his stuff. He was influenced by so many different things. I remember reading and watching interviews where they had asked him what were his influences, and he had mentioned some various different groups, whether it was obviously Black Sabbath, the Beatles, the Cocteau Twins. I had read something about Depeche Mode at one time too, which made a lot of sense, because Depeche Mode was a phenomenal band. Another band that went from the '80s all the way up, you know. So again, an extremely interesting life, and a lot to take from. A lot to take from. He had a lot of places he could definitely take from, for sure. Growing up in Brooklyn, as we said, always special thing, right? And then, of course, early on in his life, he's taking guitar lessons, and then it's usually the way it happens, right? And he goes to work for well, before he's working for the Parks Department, right? What is it, in '79? They formed the band Fallout. Now, if you've never heard the band Fallout before, you can YouTube their song "Rock Hard." There's another song they made. I can't think of the name of it, but um, it's great, and it kind of sounds to me. And again, this is just my opinion. It doesn't sound anything like Typo Negative. In fact, it sounds more like. And again, you have to remember that this is the late '70s, early '80s, so it would make sense why they sound that way. They kind of sounded to me like a combination of three bands: Devo, Depeche Mode, and something about Joy Division. That's what they reminded me of in that song. Fallout breaks up, and then he forms Carnivore, which was a whole atmosphere, whole universe of its own. And again, this is during the '80s when metal music was really gaining momentum. You had those phenomenal bands like Metallica who were absolutely kicking ass during that time. And they were no joke. Carnivore was no joke. I think they were a whole separate entity than Typo Negative, but it's always amazing to go back and see where the journey the artist has taken. So you go back in Peter's life and you're seeing Fallout, and then you're seeing Carnivore, and then eventually Typo Negative. Three different universes in types of sound, and in types of various other things. And again, like we're saying, late '70s, '80s, '90s, and Carnivore has has success. They're big on the circuit, of course. And again, when I say on the circuit at the time, another great thing about the '80s was you had a lot of these great rock clubs that we don't have anymore. And I'm talking about the great L'Amour's in Brooklyn. I was only there once. It was at the end of their run, and I saw Typo Negative play a concert there. It was obviously not the place that it used to be back in the. I wasn't around for that, unfortunately, but that was one of the great rock clubs. CBGB's, so many other of these great places that we unfortunately don't have anymore. So the circuit with Carnivore is really picking up. And I think some would call it the underground circuit. For whatever the case may be, I don't know. I could be wrong with that, but they end up splitting up in 1987. So again, in a very short time, he's had two bands through two different times, and obviously in 1989 he forms Typo Negative with his childhood friend Josh Silver, Kenny Hickey, and the original drummer of the band, Sal Abrascato, who of course was later replaced by the great Johnny Kelly. But they come together, and again, you can, like I said before in the episode 5, you can hear in Slow, Deep, and Hard how Typo Negative was still haunting their sound. They were, it sounded to me like they kind of sounded a little bit like Carnivore, and then they Slow, Deep, and Hard is a little bit more on the sped up side, yet slowed down to a bit. You hear a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, and Peter kind of is still, I guess, to an extent, finding that wonderful voice that he has, and everything at a certain time just comes together, right? And we see that on Origin of the Feces. You see it, and then you see it even more in Bloody Kisses, and you see it on October Rust. So the journey that you're always following an artist on is always an amazing, and his journey is phenomenal, man, phenomenal. Obviously, Typo Negative was originally called Repulsion, and then they were what, Sub-Zero, okay, and obviously they then changed their name to Typo Negative. All right, um, and let's face it, they really they went on to have. I mean, how many other bands do you know that can release that many albums in a a short amount of time? That can't be easy, especially the more you're growing as a group. And you have to put out content in terms of lyrics, in terms of what everything else that comes with it. That is not easy, but they were able to do it. And again, I think that his lyrics always painted a certain picture for listeners, for fans, for you got an idea of what was going on. And again, a lot of people, some people claim he sung a lot, some about some dark shit, but the greats do. That's what the greats do, and that I could compare him in with a lot of greats. And I say this because from suffering always comes a form of genius. From suffering always comes something golden. It's like spurning shit into shining gold, and only greats can do that. And we've seen people, artists, who have done that time and time again. And it doesn't have to just be in music. I always would look towards, if we were going to look into another field, I would say Edgar Allan Poe. He took from his experiences, pain, dealing with opium, the world in which he saw through his eyes, coming up the way he did. And what did he do? He became probably the greatest friggin' poet of all time, the greatest friggin' writer of all time. I don't care what anybody says. That man is a genius. And then you have other greats in music, right? Who put their heart and soul into everything. Elvis. Elvis was ridiculed for his looks, ridiculed for his dancing, for the way he dressed, but that's what he believed in. That's the way he, felt. The way he danced is when he was, he felt the music as he was dancing, and got ridiculed for it. He took from his experiences growing up, sharecropper, poor, and using all that for what he knew best. Same thing with Johnny Cash. Same thing with Jimi Hendrix. Same thing with the great Jim Morrison. And then we fast forward to the 90's. And who do we have? You draw comparisons to Kurt Cobain. You draw comparisons to Chris Cornell. You draw comparisons towards Scott Weiland. That's what greats do. And Peter was one of them. From some type of some struggle came all this wonderful shit. So I guess in a sense you can always say, if it wasn't for that struggle, what would you have? Because let's face it, man, not everything, especially music, it can't be, cotton candy, rah, 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 bullshit. It don't work that way. And don't get me wrong, a lot of that cotton candy, rah, rah, rah bullshit can make a catchy tune. Maybe like Sugar Sugar by the Archies. And I'm not shitting on that. I'm just saying. But that's a different type of music, man. That's a different type of everything's happy, peaceful. Let's go roller skating backwards while we have ice cream, shit type of shit. You know what I'm saying? There's really no depth in that. It's a song. And when I think about the 90's, I think about so many bands that didn't have depth. And again, I'm not trying to put others down, shit like that. I don't like shit talking. But when it comes in terms, all right, I'll shit talk for a second. You take a fucking band like Weezer. Fuck Weezer, man. All right, I'm a hypocrite because I do like Buddy Holly. It's a good song. It's a very good song. But what is that shit? There's no depth to that. That's like, I don't know. I can't even find a name for that. Peter's stuff was I mean, that's some deep shit. Even when you go back to Carnivore for a second, right? Uh, you go back in time. Angry Neurotic Catholics. First of all, one of the most phenomenal names for a song. But that's some deep shit. I mean, he's not only talking about suicide, but he's talking about the guilt of being Catholic, right? That comes with it because you've done something bad of being a sinner, supposedly. And the neuroticism that we see a lot of time with people, the anger that we see with them, from whatever the case may be, that's some deep shit. And even let's fast forward even and fast that. All the other songs that they had was so deep. I mean, one of the songs that always comes to mind again is World Coming Down, which by far I think is a genius of a song. And again, he's singing about you know self pity, hating yourself, and then of course All Hallows Eve, which I mentioned on one of the other shows. Just the lyrics in that. I mean, there was such depth in that. There was such originality in that. There was nothing like that on that we had heard. And of course, now you put into the equation of the way Peter looked. I mean, 6'8" at the time. At one point in time, he was jacked. He looked like you know, no one really looks like that. 6'8", a lot of muscles, dark hair, got those piercing eyes, playing that badass bass over his shoulder with the chain. No one looked like that, man. No one on the 90s circuit looked like that. No one. He was his own original look, his own original person, an original artist that you could put into this wonderful place during the 90s, because we have so many of those wonderful artists that were unique and original in their own way, whether it was Weiland or Cobain or Axl Rose or James Hetfield or Chris Cornell. All of them. That's what made them great, was the originality they had. He was one of them. And he stood alone, man, because he didn't look like that. He didn't have a voice that was similar to this guy, similar to that guy. So many times today you put on the radio and you'll say 10 seconds into it, yeah, this sounds, I've heard this shit already. I don't know. Not his voice. His voice was unique and its own entity, which made it even 10 times better. And then, like I said, you add the look, then you add the lyrics and the sound, that badass 6-string bass that he was playing, that low baritone sound. Nothing was like that. Nothing was like that, man. So this is that's one of the many aspects which made him phenomenal. And I think again, another thing too is, along his journey, you see him come back to his faith towards the end of his life, right? He sings about it. He talked about it in various interviews. And I think that's a magnificent thing to see, the human aspect of someone. A guy who wasn't afraid to put it all out there. That takes a lot of balls, man. A lot of balls to put your own personal shit that you're going through, whether it be good or bad, into your music for everyone to listen to. It's. I mean, I guess in a sense, it's a form of therapy for that matter. And greats do that. Again, that's what greats do. He was able to do that. Sing about the strain and pain of addiction and the battles. You heard about it in Dead Again. You heard about it in I Don't Want to Be Me. So many other songs. Even his, like I said, the whole thing with from being from having religious beliefs and then going through a period of kind of straying away from it. Don't Isn't that what we all do as humans, or most of us? That's a great thing to appreciate about the person, instead of pretending to be something you're not, as pretending to be, all angelic and all this shit, and not living exactly for what you are. Like, I hate when I see shit like that. Like, when it's a show. When it's a show. With him, what you saw is what you got. And again, I love the fact that when you go back and you watch those early videos of him when he was on what's his name, Jerry Springer, and what's the Ricky Lake, man, that is absolutely hilarious. I love the way he's having a lot of fun with Jerry Springer, but at the same time, that's you see him for exactly what he was: self-deprecating, never took himself too serious, extremely comedic. Great stuff, man. Great, great stuff. Lot of layers, which you can always appreciate. Another interesting thing was I think it was amazing how he had also taken a shot at acting. It's funny because I was a huge fan of the show Oz, one of the greatest shows of all time, one of the early shows of HBO that really captured the prison aspect of life in extreme depth. I mean, it was raw, man. And there's that episode I didn't find out till so many years later that was Peter, where I forgot the actor's name. He's running in the gymnasium, and then you just see this big, tall guy just grab him, and in that great Peter voice, is I think it goes something like "Come here, motherfucker," and they grab him, and whatever else happens after that. But he was also in that as well. I always wondered. I always thought he would have been an interesting actor if he would have, done it a lot more. I think that there would have definitely been a place for him, especially with the voice and the look. But again, another area that he was into. Um, and each album, obviously, you could tell that there was a lot of great thought that went into each album because they took on themes of their own, and a lot of that had come from Peter's experiences for whatever it is he was going through, and each album tells its own story. And again, I bring it back to his coming back to the church, coming back to his religious beliefs in that last album, which was amazing. Even white slavery on World Coming Down, where he's talking about his battles uh, with certain substances. These all come from real places. Sometimes when you hear songs and you wonder about the lyrics, the artist will say, "Well, I just kind of made that up," which I'm sure happens all the time. But it also it's I think you really have a more appreciation for it sometimes when there's something behind it. And again, like I said, when you have the balls to sing about stuff like that, it just makes it even more interesting. Especially when you're, being typo negative fans, man. Hearing Todd Shipgods, hearing Nettie, you want to know what that's about. What's he talking about? And again, he's always pulling things from his experiences, from his surroundings. King's Highway, um, like I said before, the shipyard. So even other places as well. Other places as well. These are always wonderful aspects to see from an artist. What I loved about Peter too was that he actually had a love for another job that he had, and that was working for the New York City Parks Department. That was something he really liked. He really loved to do. And I find that fascinating because so many times we don't have artists that or that we know about that have other loves or things that they really find interesting. And I always found that to be a rather interesting aspect because I guess people consider that to be a blue collar job, although I don't go by white collar, blue collar, green collar, whatever the fuck. It's a job. And it's something that I always could resonate with because again, that's a very um, it's a very good job to have. You're helping cleaning up the parks, keeping them serviceable for people, pollution, whatnot. I always found it very interesting because I had a lot of family who were sanitation workers, uncles, grandfathers who had a job similar to that, and they really enjoyed it. And it's always great to see again somebody come from the place in which you were born in Brooklyn and have so many fond memories of and have so many family members from. And it's funny, I had learned later on in life that, later on, that he was always, that he really enjoyed the restaurant Brennan and Carr. Being a Peter fan, I was like, holy shit, that's a place that I still go to, that I've been to. I haven't been there in a bit, I gotta admit, but everyone knows that place. So, that was always one of the more interesting aspects. But I love the fact that he was down to earth. All these things, he was down to earth. He was actually not one of these mega hypocrites that we see sometimes. Not all. I'm just saying that there's good and bad in everything. But he was exactly what he was, which is great. And to see that he was a hardworking person who had another job other than music. And you always wonder, imagine if he would have stayed with that. Well, we wouldn't have the great Peter Steele and all the great music that they were able to create. So it would really be an unfortunate thing. And of course, they find a lot of success in the 90's. And this is a time, like I said, Peter's already in his 30s, which isn't old at all. And for the most part, I would think that it worked out well, because sometimes when you have that fame at a young age, it can backfire on you. And I'm sure that was extremely stressful at the time. Having to deal with all that's going on in a band has got to be, what do I know about that? I know nothing about that, but it's got to be extremely stressful. Plus, you're touring and the next album, and you're always recording songs and you're writing songs. And then, with everything else that's going on, and then there's life, right? Um, that can never be easy, man. And then, of course, there's the when he poses for Playgirl. If anyone, I don't know if there's anyone that hasn't seen those pictures. I've seen it. I haven't seen it in depth, but that's a trip, man. That's an absolute trip. It's such an interesting life. Short lived, unfortunately, extremely short lived. But again, able to just be in so many different places and do all these wonderful things that he was doing, be a part of so many different aspects of the business. It's rare. And again, like I said before, the total, his own unique total package. I mean, 6'8". Some people call it menacing, especially when you saw him live on stage. Another great thing about him was he had a great rapport with his fan base, even when it was live. You want to hear a real quick funny story? I got to tell it, because it wouldn't be right if I didn't. So, one of the many times I saw Typo Negative, I always mention my good buddy Frank Ferry. As you all know, who were able to see Typo Negative live, what used to happen for the majority of the time is they would also always kind of throw out rolls of toilet paper into the crowd, and the crowd would most likely throw it back at the band. So, I think we were at the Fillmore East. I could have the venue incorrect, but my buddy Frank has the toilet paper in his hand, and literally, we still laugh about it to this day. He was loading up like Brett Favre, because he's a Packer nut, and he let a bomb loose, and we're watching the toilet paper, unravel as it's flying through the air, and I shit you not, it hits Johnny Kelly directly in the face. Okay. And I remember we all we all screamed, "It hit him! It hit him!" We were dying. But I remember Peter was saying something on the microphone, and one of the fans had thrown the toilet paper at him, and he happened to move as it went by him, and he stopped what he was saying, looked at the guy in that deep monotone voice. "You should pitch for the fucking Yankees." He always had a really cool rapport with fans, man, especially live in concert. Always, bickering, going back and forth, being self-deprecating, being funny, yet while performing, being, musical serious, and putting on a great show. It's extremely rare. Another interesting aspect was his battles with his mental demons, like we all have. Again, that's what great artists do. They pull. They go through these things, and they pull from things. And of course, so many of us that have struggled with depression, anxiety, and whatever else mental, we can appreciate that in the artist. We can appreciate that in the words and in the music. And I think that's one of the many aspects why so many people who love the music can find a comparison there because that's what they are going through, or that's what they are thinking, or that's something that they had lived through. And that's always the, what, that magnetizing feeling, especially when it hits home. It's always something I think that resonates a lot more with people, and I'm sure that was the case. And then, of course, like I said before, is so many other aspects of his life that he put out there that uh, that people can find something interesting about, or that they can resonate with. There was so many of them. That was the great thing. And the worst part is that it was, he died at a young age, which really sucked. Um, and again, I think in retrospect, so many people, so many fans know what a phenomenal band they were, know what a phenomenal lead singer and bassist he was, a phenomenal writer, and again, the unfortunate death just absolutely was, sucked. I think that, in my opinion, it was when music kind of died. And think about it for a second. We who lived through the 90's, who hold this time so special and sacred, think about all the great artists that we lost from the 90's. We lost Peter. We lost Chris Cornell. We lost Scott Weiland. We lost Lane Staley. We lost Shannon Hoon. We lost Andy Wood. We lost Kurt Cobain. Excuse me. We lost so many. Whether they lived longer than others, whether they were part of that 27 club. And if you don't know what I mean, you could look into that because it's extremely interesting aspect. It's just, I guess, the strange way that so many artists die at 27. And it doesn't just have to be with the 90's. It also goes back to Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Mama Cass. For anybody who was prominently huge in the 90's to pass away, we lost so many of these wonderful acts. It absolutely sucks that he's no longer with us. Like I said before, there's nothing that comes to mind more around the Halloween time that I can think of than going to see Typo Negative in concert. And the fact that that doesn't happen anymore absolutely blows. Music has never been the same. In my opinion, it's absolutely gotten worse. Or you have to be you got to be an archaeologist to find the really good stuff. But that's why what we have will stay with us forever. And again, I put him in that special group of artists that we had during this time. He's one of the many that made this special time in the 90's phenomenal. And he's one of the rare who made this time, not just in the 90's, but also music in general, phenomenal. When you have the talent that he did, when you can play an instrument like he could, when you can write lyrics like he did, when you have the look and the vocals, the originality, the authenticity. There's nothing like that at all on this planet. Everything aligns together, and it is what it is. And when you have that power to go through all these different situations and live through all these different things and pull beauty out of darkness, it just makes things 10 times more interesting. His fascination with death, as he sung about in so many different songs. Um, you were always drawn to it. As fans, we know that we were always drawn to it. It always kept us interested, like most of the lyrics in the songs, for that matter. Um, as there's never be another. Hence, be why our time during those 90s was so special. I think it's something sometimes that we don't take it for granted, but when you look back at it, that's why I always called it our 60s, because it was during that special time that we had all these wonderful this wonderful music being played, and Peter was at the forefront of that in his own original way. And for anyone that isn't really familiar with him or his work, man, take the time, go back, listen to everything from Fallout to Carnivore to Typo Negative. I mean, it's well worth it. Go watch the interviews with him. Go watch how intelligent he was, how well he knew his history. He was, his other interests, cars, history, all that stuff. I mean, very well read. Take the time, man. As the man said, right? Buy the ticket, take the ride. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, man. I wish he was still around, kicking ass, making new music. I always wondered. Imagine all the unreleased stuff they had. I always there's always hope. I always have hope that maybe one day they'll be able to put it out if possible. That would be really cool to have all the unreleased stuff out there. I don't think it is out there, but it would be really cool to have it out there. So yeah, man. You know, going to the cemetery to see his gravestone. I don't know, man. It sometimes it's shocking. I know um, it was definitely shocking. One of the first times I did it, I had to go into the office to find where he was buried, and then you go to the grave and you see the name, but you still can't believe it. When you're a fan and someone that you really enjoy isn't there anymore, it's kind of hard to take into consideration. I can't even imagine what it would be like for friends and family who like really knew him in depth and well. It's got to be 10 times worse. But every time I make a trek to the cemetery, I definitely stop by and always say hello. Um, but can you do, man? One of the greats, man. Listen, I really appreciate you guys listening. Please check out the other episodes I have had. I will be putting up some more episodes coming this week. Got a lot of cool stuff on deck. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. If you get the chance, please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And I love hearing from everybody. From all types of fans. In this case, Peter Steele fans, Typo Negative fans. Man, reach out, even if it's something you don't like. It's all good, man. It's all good. Drop me a message, whatever you got to do. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of the day. The beast is going back to the cave. Later.